Wait a minute.
Hear this.
Birdy num num. Birdy num num. Birdy num num.
What's up, ladies and gents, and welcome back to another episode of the Birdy Num Num podcast. The BNN having a good week. I hope you all are having a good week. I apologize. I have been out of station, as we say here in India, for the last few weeks, so that's why I missed the upload last week. But getting straight to it, this week on the podcast, because we have a nice open dialogue, always, you and I. If you like, rate, review, you will know that always. I do respond to most comments, and this week, one of your comments was, "Hey Sanjay, can you do a podcast on how to overcome stage fright?" Bum, bum, bum. Yes, my friend, yes, I totally can, and I love doing this because I still get stage fright almost 10 years into doing stand-up comedy, and stage fright is one of those things that even if you're not a performer, if you want to get anywhere in life, you're going to need to overcome it. And even if you're doing a meeting at a table like my dining table here in front of 6 people at your office, you are going to get stage fright. And a lot of people, maybe not mostly in India, but my experience has been working in India for the last almost 10 years, is that, on the soft skills, on the communication, communicado, on the presentations, on the public speaking, the West does have a slight leg up when it comes to the soft skills. Technically, I mean, everyone's doing great here. But when it comes to soft skills and public speaking, we are a little lacking, but it's not something that cannot be easily overcome. Unfortunately, because people are so good with the tech and the money is really good or good, with tech, most people don't develop these skills. And I have seen 45-year-old guys giving a presentation who were way more nervous than like a 22-year-old kid, both Indian, here in Bangalore, where the 22-year-old kid just had way more stage prowess. And that is because a lot of us overlook it. So getting straight to it, how do you overcome stage fright? So a lot of things you can read online, a lot of blogs, talking about stage fright or how-to guides will tell you things like breathe and, don't, what do they say? Like, imagine the audience naked. And I don't know if you've seen most audiences. They're not attractive naked. I don't think I'd ever want to look at 600 people naked or even 60 people naked or even 6 people naked. That just seems weird. Or imagine your audience in your underwear. How would that make things easier, So you've heard these things growing up that that's an easy way to overcome stage fright, but let me tell you, that is a bunch of baloney, a bunch of BS. There are actually no easy ways to overcome stage fright, but like anything in life, if it's too easy, it's not worth doing. Am I right here, folks, listeners of the BNN, the Birdy Num Nums? So, number one, I'm going to give you a very... it's not even a sure shot way. This is just practical advice. So there's no life hacks here. There's no cheats here. This is just honest advice. This is like an instruction manual. It's like, hey, you want to get rich, or you want to write a book? Here's the way you write a book quickly. You open up Google Docs and you start writing 6,000 words per chapter. Done, So on the same note, how do you overcome stage fright? Number one, memorize, okay? A lot of people, I have this theory, and I know the theory will not hold up if I get 1,000 examples, but hear me out. I have this theory that as technology, makes a lot of things obsolete, those who get really good at the skills nobody else is focusing on will do really well. For example, our memories. We don't even need them anymore. You know what I mean? You have every answer to every question right here. And for the audio listeners, I'm holding up what you are probably listening to me on, which is the mobile phone. And why is it even called a phone anymore? It's basically just your mobile memory device or your cloud device or whatever, because the phone is the least used app on my phone. So let's stop calling it a phone. But yes, memory, okay? I mean, look at sports. Look at, basketball is not a skill that's going to take you far unless you're just really good at putting a hoop into a ball. And I don't mean to demean the art of basketball or the skill of basketball. But what I mean is, it's not something that's going to be practical, but those who are excellent at it do well. In the future, Elon Musk says we're going to have like a billion unemployed drivers, but I'm pretty sure the best drivers, the ones who keep doing it, are going to do really well, whether they're driving through an asteroid or a cave or who knows what, right? And on a much more practical example, these days, nobody really uses their memory properly. Nobody bothers to memorize stuff, whether it's, kids do it because they got to learn languages and maths and multiplication tables. But why do they even have to learn multiplication tables, to be honest now? I'm glad schools still do it. But most of us as adults after 22 do not memorize anything. And in public speaking and in performing and in anything, you really need to get over the first, what do you call it? Like riding a bike with two wheels, you know what I mean? Like you need to get over that first hurdle, and that first hurdle to obviously even speaking a language effectively is to learn the language. And whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's a 10-page PowerPoint presentation or whether it's a full comedic routine or it's a pitch to a venture capitalist or, you're just trying to impress, a girl by singing a song or whatever it may be, you need to memorize, all right? Nobody does it, but I'm telling you, take 30 minutes. Dude, what I used to do when I was working at Accenture was I would rent a conference room, not rent, but I would book a conference room, act like I was busy. I would turn the blinds down, and then I would whiteboard my 15-slide presentation with a marker with 15 bullet points. And the idea for that was every time I got to like slide 3 by memorizing and talking to the empty conference room, then I would be like, crap, what's my next point? And naturally, what do most people do? They just keep the PPT on the projector, and then they're like, oh, okay, and then next, and the next, and they keep reading off the slide, and then they just bomb the presentation. But instead, my goal was to never look at the presentation or the comedy routine or whatever. So every time I would get to like point 4, then I'd have to turn around to remember what my next point was. Then I would start over, and then I would get to point 7 and then point 9, yada, yada. Okay. So most people, I'm telling you, dude, okay, it's kind of ironic that I have to say this, but the life hack is not a hack. The life hack is basically do the work. You know what I mean? Like the life hack is memorize. So most people don't. They kind of try to shortcut it or use technology to try to wing it, but then they lead to a very boring presentation. And how this relates to stage fright is ultimately overcoming stage fright is about basically having confidence. And like I said before in another podcast, I think just a couple of weeks ago, is if you can memorize, you can really get ahead of this whole stage fright thing. Number 2, okay. Not a lot of people do this when they present, and it took me years in comedic performing to figure this out. I did I was in New York last week, if anybody was following me there or seeing my post at the Empire State Building. I had to do a presentation for this company talking about digital marketing and all that stuff. And while I was there, even for a room of 20 people, I was making eye contact with all 20 of them. And if you're performing for even 2,000 people, you need to make eye contact. And not like, hey, man, what's going on? But you need to literally you need to look at probably, let's assume there's 100 people in front of you. I would say a rule of thumb is try to look at somebody for 10 seconds. No, 10 seconds is a long time. I'm looking at you right now for 1, 2. Okay, I'm not going to go all the way, but 10 seconds is a long time, right? So I would say just, when you're in person and you're performing or you're giving a talk for like 5, 6 people, just look at somebody long enough. Rule of thumb is to notice the color of their eyes. Basic one. That's one for life, by the way. If you're on a date and you don't want to just like keep looking at her awkwardly, like, hi, how are you? A good rule of thumb with somebody new is basically look at them long enough to see the color of their eyes, then look away. If you're really awkward and you can't do it naturally. Now, with stage fright and talking, once you have your 10 points memorized or your PPT memorized or your pitch memorized, here's something like, dude, going back to the memory thing a little bit, like it's so powerful to actually have memorized like actors memorize their stuff all the time. I did an audition the other day. They asked me to send a cell phone clip and I had to memorize like a page, and I was like, oh my God, a page, not a page. But then after I did it, the actual memory part, and for anyone who ever wants to go into Bollywood or Hollywood, a lot of these actor agent people, they'll tell you, oh no, it's fine. You can read off the paper and you can audition. they'll say it's fine because they need the audition, but it's not fine. So, I mean, you might just want to get it done and just read off the thing, but take the extra 30 minutes. I know it's painful. The brain uses way more calories than the body is something I think is true, but if not, I made it up here. And it's way more taxing to spend those 30 minutes memorizing, but once you do, it makes the actual performance or speech a lot better. But where was I going with this? Yeah, like once you have the memorization down, you're not worried about it, then the eye contact becomes a lot easier. And literally look at 20% of the people, just like get that confirmation, because here's something interesting. When you look at people, they have no choice but to engage with you because it's naturally uncomfortable for them to look away. And guess what happens then? They listen, and they don't just listen, like they hear you and they listen. You know what I mean? So memorization, big deal. Eye contact, obviously a big deal. Now, number 3, and probably the final one that I want to talk about, short one this week, you guys, because I am still jet lagged. Number 3 on the podcast is, here's something nobody tells you, okay? When you're given a talk or where you're talking to strangers, I've done shows for 2,000 strangers and I've done shows for like 15 family members. I'm way more nervous if I do a show for like 100 people and like my mom or my wife is there or somebody else is there than I am if it's like 2,000 strangers. You know what I mean? When it's somebody you know or somebody you're closer to or just somebody that is more impactful, there's kind of a less distance. So it's not a quantity thing. I wouldn't say it's a quality thing, but it's like, it's just that kind of connection kind of gets in your head a lot more. So I naturally understand, like if you're given a presentation or you were invited to like a Toastmasters thing for a bunch of strangers, just know you may not be as nervous than obviously doing it in front of all your colleagues at like a company function, right? So I will tell you though, a lot of it is in your head. A lot of times when I've had to do these sorts of talks and then, I'm nervous that if I'm stuttering or if people aren't listening, they're going to think about it all the time. As my camera goes out at the opportune moment, like they're going to like look at me the next day or for the next year at the office. I'm like, oh, there's the guy who bombed that presentation. But guess what? People have their own lives. And more importantly, you're not that important. You know what I mean? So it's natural for us to think like, imagine one day if you were at a bar and you were acting very drunk and you ran into some senior guy at your office. Then the next time for the next year, you think all that senior guy is going to think about is how you were drunk at the bar. Probably not. He probably will think about it for like a day or two, and then he's on to 50 other things that's going on in his head. But you're going to let that consume you. So a lot of times we tend to overanalyze just how important we are to people. And I'm saying that's a good thing if you don't, because it's going to take the burden off of you to give a lot to kind of speak a lot easier. But ultimately, my number one thing is memorize, because if you don't memorize, the rest is going to crumble like a house of cards. And Kevin Spacey, despite him, and speaking of Kevin Spacey and another guy who was not well received in the news the last few years, one of the best things I ever saw about stage fright was a talk by, yes, I know the person is not the best one to bring up right now, but he did give the talk, and I watched this like 5 years ago, and it still stuck with me. Was Bill Cosby? He had done a commencement speech at Temple University, because I was struggling with performing at a lot of these big comedy clubs in Bombay. This was like 5-6 years ago, where I would literally shake, because that is a club with the shiny lights. And by the way, for anybody who's given a talk at a hotel or a big meeting or a big stage, just remember, one thing you may not realize is those lights are so bright that you cannot even see people reacting sometimes. The stage looks like a sea of black, minus maybe the front row, which has some of the stage lights spilled over, so you can see the front row, but you cannot see beyond the front row. So that is a bit jarring for people. So just know, sometimes you may not even be able to see the audience. That's how bright things are. So don't let that rattle you, but just be prepared for it. But anyways, Bill Cos, the BC. Oh, I just realized that acronym. Okay, but BC was like, somebody asked him. He had performed at a club years ago, and, he had been waiting his whole career to perform at this club, and he finally got the opportunity, and he had analyzed it and overanalyzed it so much in his head that he had two shows that night, and the 8 p.m. show, because he had put so much pressure on himself, even though he'd been doing comedy for like 15 years at that point, he just tanked the show, like bombed it beyond belief. And the club promoter comes at him, and just from, again, hang in there with me, just listen to the story, not the character or whatever. But the club promoter came at him and said something like, "Hey man, that was a rough show, and I don't know where Bill Cosby is, but if you see him," and he's talking to Bill Cosby, right? And he's like, "I don't know where he is, but if you see him, you better tell him to get his ass over here, because there's a second show, and if he wants to get paid, he's really got to show up." And so, our comedian friend here was like, "You've been doing this for 15 years. Yesterday, you were fine doing the same act for the 100th time in front of, whoever. So how are you letting this get into your head? Like, you deserve to be here." And whether you're, a team lead, talking to a bunch of freshers, or you're a startup guy trying to hire 3 people, or even do a job interview or whatever, like, if you're in that situation, you naturally pretty much deserve to be there. Hell, even if you lied on your resume or you did whatever, if you're there and you're doing whatever it is you're doing, you most likely, like, there's not a reason for you to bomb it. So, that's really helped me. And again, just from the story's sake, not from the person's sake, but that really helped me now whenever I get nervous. It's kind of a weird kick in the butt, but I'm just like, dude, I've earned this, whether or not we all have imposter syndrome, and we all kind of, go through insecurity and doubt, because that's normal to be humble even about your own accomplishments and achievements. But, without getting ahead of yourself, at the very least you can do is have some confidence to be where you are today. You know what I mean? So that's really helped me. Every time I'm about to like shit my pants, or soil my pants, or that, none of that sounds good. Okay, but every time I get really caught up in something, and I just start kind of getting like, not a panic attack, but like a little bit of anxiety about it, I'm like, dude, come on, man, you earned this, and it's time to rock and roll. So I hope that was helpful, you guys. If you take anything away from this week's podcast, again, please, please, please just memorize, because Google says do no evil, but the unintended consequence of that is there's a lot of evil going on in here if you don't memorize things. So just try to do me a favor and try to memorize something that takes 10 minutes this week, and then next week try to go 11 minutes, and just notice these things will improve, whether or not it's vocabulary, whether it's the same BS PowerPoint you present on a sales call every 3 weeks or whatever it is. Just try to memorize it, and you'll notice good things happen. So I'll see you guys next week. Don't forget to like, rate, review.
Birdie num num. Birdie num num. A birdie num num.